Hello, and welcome back to the Violet Library. Where are you listening from today? And if it's been a while you've been here, we understand that sometimes life gets in the way of a good night's rest. Every time you arrive here, the Violet Library waits. A single lantern glows in the tall window, guiding you inside. The heavy oak doors swing open without a sound, and suddenly the noise of the world fades away. Within these walls, time slows. The shelves rise high above you, filled with books that whisper softly to one another. It is quiet here and safe. This is a place for you to rest. Take a slow, gentle breath. Inhale deeply and let it out with ease. Do it again. In and out. With each breath, imagine setting down the weight of the day, the niggling worries. Set them down as if you've been carrying too many bags, and now at last you can let them go. Notice the chair beneath you, the soft, large cushion, the warmth of the soft lamplight. The library holds you like an old friend. Here, you do not need to do anything or be anyone. You are safe. As you breathe, you may find your body softening. Your shoulders drop a little. Your jaw loosens. Even your hands, which have worked so hard today, begin to relax. Thoughts may still come. Worries may hover, but they don't need to stay. You can let them float away, like leaves drifting down a quiet stream. The Violet Library waits for you patiently, inviting you deeper into stillness. There is no rush, no expectation, just peace. Allow yourself to feel gratitude for this moment, for the simple gift of being alive, for the shelter of your room, for the chance to rest. Know that you deserve this. We all do. And now, as you breathe a little easier, imagine yourself walking further inside the library. The shelves glow softly in the golden light, and one book seems to shine brighter than the rest. It has been waiting for you. Tonight, that book will open and its story will become your dream. Tonight's tale is Whispers Beneath the Oak, a magical story of lessons and rest. The garden had always been there, tucked away behind the crumbling stone wall at the edge of the village. Though few remembered when it had first been planted or by whose careful hands. Eleanor discovered it on an evening when the autumn light fell thick and golden through the copper beeches, when the air itself seemed to have weight and texture, like amber honey poured slowly from an ancient jar. She had been walking without purpose, her thoughts as scattered as the leaves that tumbled and spun along the narrow lane, when she noticed a wooden gate she could have sworn had never existed before. It was weathered gray, with iron hinges that had rusted to the color of dried blood, and it stood slightly ajar, as though waiting. Through the gap, she glimpsed the great spreading crown of an oak tree, its leaves burnished bronze and gold, and without quite deciding to do so, she found her hand upon the gate and her feet carrying her through. The garden beyond was larger than seemed possible, stretching away into a gentle dusk that appeared to exist independently of the evening world she had just left. Flower beds lay in orderly rows, though what bloomed there were not the expected roses or dahlias, but strange blossoms she could not name, some luminous as pearls, others dark as midnight, all releasing fragrances that stirred half-forgotten memories of childhood summers and winter firesides, of bread baking and rain on windows and the particular smell of her grandmother's shawl. The paths were laid with pale gravel that crunched softly underfoot, and they wound between beds of rosemary and lavender, past ancient sundials, green with lichen, under archways where clematis hung in purple curtains. Everything was touched with the peculiar stillness that comes just before night fully settles, when the world holds its breath and waits, and even the birds fall silent in the trees. Eleanor walked slowly, her footsteps the only sound, drawn forward by something she could not name, until she reached the oak tree at the garden's heart. It was the oldest tree she had ever seen, its trunk so broad that 5 people holding hands could not have encircled it, its bark deeply furrowed and gray as storm clouds. The massive branches spread outward and upward in patterns that seemed both chaotic and perfectly ordered, like the branching of blood vessels or the delta of a great river seen from high above. Beneath its canopy, the light was soft and green gold, filtered through countless leaves that whispered and murmured, though Eleanor felt no wind upon her face. At the tree's base, between 2 great roots that rose like the knees of some slumbering giant, sat a man reading a book. He was elderly, with a face weathered as driftwood, and eyes that held the color of the autumn sky just after sunset, that particular shade between gray and blue that is neither and both. He did not look up as Eleanor approached, but she knew somehow that he was aware of her presence and that she was welcome here, though no word had been spoken and no invitation extended. "You've come," the old man said, not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact, the way one might observe that rain is wet or that stones are heavy. His voice was soft and deep, with an unhurried quality that reminded Eleanor of rivers flowing over smooth pebbles, of wind moving through long grass, of things that had always been and always would be. He closed his book, a leather-bound volume with pages that looked thin and soft as cloth, and set it carefully beside him on a root that served as a natural bench. The garden calls to those who need it, though they rarely know they need it until they arrive. I am Thomas, and I have been keeper of this place for longer than memory serves, though whether I chose this task or it chose me, I can no longer quite recall. Time moves differently here, you see. An hour might be a moment, or a moment might contain multitudes. But you needn't concern yourself with such puzzles. Sit, if you wish. The evening is gentle, and there is time yet before the stars appear. Eleanor found herself sitting without conscious decision, settling onto the root opposite Thomas, her back against the oak's broad trunk. The bark was surprisingly warm against her shoulders, and she felt a vibration running through it, subtle as a heartbeat, as though the tree were a living thing that breathed and felt and remembered. Perhaps it was, she thought. In this place, such things seemed not merely possible, but probable, even inevitable. Thomas watched her with those sky-colored eyes, and there was such kindness in his gaze, such infinite patience, that Eleanor felt the tight knot of worry she had been carrying in her chest begin to loosen. She had not known she was worried, not consciously, but now that the tension was easing, she could feel how heavy it had been, how long she had carried it. This tree, Thomas said, his gnarled hand resting on the bark beside him with obvious affection, has stood here since before the village existed, since before the lane was cut or the stone wall built. Some say it was planted by the first people who came to this land, others that it grew from an acorn dropped by a bird at the beginning of the world. I cannot say which tale is true, if either, but I know that it listens, and it remembers, and those who rest beneath it often find what they did not know they sought. As if summoned by Thomas's words, another figure emerged from the garden's dusky paths. She was young, perhaps 20, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that held a peculiar sadness despite the smile that touched her lips. She wore a coat of deep forest green and carried a wicker basket over one arm, filled with what appeared to be apples, though they were such a dark red they seemed almost black in the fading light. "Good evening, Thomas," she said, her voice carrying the lilt of an accent. Eleanor could not quite place something ancient and musical, like water over stones or wind through reeds. "I've brought the harvest apples from the western corner, the ones that grow on the twisted tree near the wall. They're perfect now, sweet and tart together, and the flesh is white as snow." She noticed Eleanor then, and her smile deepened, reaching her eyes and banishing some of the sorrow there. "And we have a visitor. How lovely. It's been quite some time since anyone new found their way here. I'm Meredith. I help Thomas tend the garden, though the garden, I suspect, tends more to us than we to it. Will you stay a while?" Thomas was just about to tell an evening story, I think. He always does when the light begins to turn. Thomas nodded slowly, a smile creasing his weathered face like tributaries running toward a great river. "Indeed I was, though I hadn't quite realized it until you said so, Meredith. That's the way with stories here, they arrive when they're needed, not when they're planned. This garden has a way of knowing." He adjusted his position slightly, settling deeper against the oak's trunk, and both Eleanor and Meredith grew quiet, expectant. The garden around them seemed to hush as well, as if even the flowers and the small creatures in the undergrowth were listening. The quality of the light shifted, becoming thicker, more present, as though the air itself were made of something more substantial than usual, not heavy, but rich, textured, full of possibility. Eleanor felt herself relaxing completely, her breathing slowing, her mind settling into a state of receptive calm she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. This, she thought, was what peace felt like. This suspended moment between day and night, between purpose and rest, when nothing was required and everything was permitted. Long ago, Thomas began, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a practiced storyteller, when this oak was young, though already old, by the measure of human lives, there lived in the village a woman named Iris, who could not sleep. Night after night, she lay awake while darkness pressed against her windows and the hours crawled past like wounded things. She had tried every remedy: warm milk with honey, chamomile tea steeped until it was bitter, counting backwards from 1,000, reciting poetry, breathing deeply until her lungs ached. Nothing helped. The waking world would not release her into dreams, and she grew hollow-eyed and thin, her thoughts as tangled as thorn bushes, her heart heavy as stone. One autumn evening, much like this one, she walked from the village into the countryside, driven by desperation and a dim, instinctive sense that somewhere, somehow, there must be help for her. She found the garden, as you did, Eleanor, and she found this tree, and she found the keeper who tended it, then my predecessor, a woman named Marjorie, who had hair white as frost and hands gentle as falling snow. Thomas paused, reaching down to pick up one of the dark apples from Meredith's basket. He turned it slowly in his weathered hands, examining it as though he had never seen an apple before, as though it contained mysteries worth contemplating. The fruit gleamed in the gathering dusk, and Eleanor noticed that it seemed to hold light within itself, a soft red glow like embers buried deep in ash. Marjorie told Iris to rest beneath the oak, Thomas continued, and to let the tree carry her worries for a time. Iris was skeptical. She had been disappointed too many times to hope easily, but she was also too exhausted to resist. She lay down between the roots, much as you are sitting now, and she placed her hand upon the bark. And the oak, old even then, began to whisper to her. Not with words exactly, but with something deeper than words, with the slow, patient rhythm of its growth, with the memory of countless seasons turning, with the certainty that comes from being rooted deep in the earth while reaching high toward the sky. It whispered of spring rains and summer heat, of autumn color and winter sleep, of cycles that turn and turn again, of rest that is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence. And for the first time in months, Iris slept. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, held safe in the tree's ancient embrace, and when she woke, the dawn light was gentle on her face, and the birds were singing, and she felt, for the first time in so long, whole. Meredith reached into her basket and withdrew 3 apples, handing 1 each to Eleanor and Thomas before taking the 3rd for herself. Eleanor accepted it automatically, surprised by its weight and warmth, as though it had been sitting in sunlight rather than tucked away in wicker. The skin was smooth and cool beneath her fingers, and when she lifted it close, she caught a scent that was somehow more than apple, something that spoke of orchards at harvest time, of cider presses and autumn bonfires, of everything good and nourishing and simple. She bit into it without thinking, and the taste flooded her mouth with sweetness, cut by just enough tartness to keep it from being cloying. The flesh was crisp and white, exactly as Meredith had promised, and as she chewed, Eleanor felt something within her settling even further, some last element of tension dissolving like sugar in warm tea. The garden seemed to approve, the oak's leaves rustling with what might have been satisfaction, though still Eleanor felt no wind. The oak gave Iris more than sleep that night, Thomas said, biting into his own apple with evident pleasure, juice glistening briefly in his beard before he wiped it away with the back of his hand. It gave her understanding. When she returned to the village, she carried with her the knowledge that sleep is not something to be conquered or achieved through force of will, but rather something to be allowed, to be welcomed, to be invited, like a friend who has been away too long. She learned that the body knows its own wisdom, that the mind needs permission to quiet itself, that rest is not the opposite of work, but its necessary complement. She taught others what the oak had taught her, not through lectures or instructions, but simply by being present, by listening, by creating spaces where stillness was honored rather than feared. She became, in her way, a keeper of peace in the village, and people would seek her out when their own thoughts grew too loud or their hearts too burdened. And always she would tell them about the garden and the oak and the way the tree had held her when she could not hold herself. Eleanor found herself thinking of her own restless nights, the way her mind would spiral through worries and regrets, replaying conversations that were long finished, anticipating problems that might never arrive, churning through an endless catalog of anxiety and doubt. She had grown so accustomed to this internal tumult that she had almost forgotten it was possible to feel any other way. But here, now, beneath this ancient oak with Thomas's story washing over her like a gentle tide and the taste of apple sweet on her tongue, she remembered what it was to simply be, without striving or struggling or trying to fix something that perhaps was not broken at all. The remembering was bittersweet, tinged with grief for all the peaceful moments she had missed by refusing to be still, but it was also liberating, as though a door she had thought locked forever had suddenly swung open to reveal a garden beyond this garden, perhaps, or one very like it, existing in that country of the mind where possibility dwells. Night had arrived fully now, though Eleanor could not have said exactly when the transition occurred. The sky above the oak's spreading crown had deepened to a dark velvet blue, and stars were emerging one by one, cold and bright and impossibly distant. Yet the garden itself seemed to generate its own illumination, a soft, silvery glow that came from no particular source, but was simply present, allowing Eleanor to see Meredith's face clearly, and Thomas's, and the shapes of flowers in their beds, and the pale gravel paths winding away into shadows that seemed inviting rather than threatening. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its voice both mournful and comforting, and closer by, in the oak's branches, Eleanor heard other birds settling for the night, small rustlings and chirps as they tucked themselves away beneath their wings. The tree itself seemed more alive than ever, its presence enormous and enfolding, and Eleanor understood suddenly that Thomas's story about Iris was not just a story, but an invitation, an offering, a map to a territory she had thought lost forever. "Would you like to rest here for a while?" Meredith asked gently, setting aside her apple core and brushing her hands together. The oak welcomes sleepers, and there is no better place in all the world to find the peace you're seeking, though you might not have known you were seeking it when you walked through that gate. Time is strange here, as Thomas mentioned. You might close your eyes for what seems like moments and find that hours have passed, or you might rest for what feels like hours and discover that only minutes have gone by. But however long you stay, you will leave refreshed, and you will carry something of the garden's stillness with you when you go. That is the oak's gift, freely given, asking nothing in return except that you allow yourself to receive it. Many people find that difficult, the receiving. They are so accustomed to earning and striving and proving themselves worthy that the idea of simply accepting grace makes them uncomfortable. But grace, real grace, does not calculate worthiness. It simply is, like rain falling on just and unjust alike, like light streaming through windows whether they are clean or dirty. Eleanor looked at Thomas, and he nodded encouragingly, his eyes warm with understanding. "Meredith speaks truly," he said. "This is a place of rest, and you are welcome to it for as long as you need. When you wake, if you choose to sleep, we will still be here, and you may go or stay as you wish. There is no obligation, no debt incurred. The garden gives freely because that is its nature, as the sun gives light, and the rain gives water, and the earth gives life to all things that grow upon it. You are safe here, completely safe, held by something far older and wiser and more patient than human worry or human fear. Let the oak carry you for a while. Let yourself be held." And with those words, Eleanor felt the last of her resistance crumble. She shifted her position, lying down between the great roots, as Iris had done long ago, her head pillowed on soft moss that had not been there a moment before, but seemed to have appeared exactly when it was needed. Above her, the oak's leaves whispered and sang, and the sound was like water, like wind, like breath, like the very first and very last sound a person might ever hear, the sound of existence itself, patient and endless, and kind beyond all measure. As Eleanor's eyes grew heavy and began to close, she was aware of Thomas's voice continuing, softer now, more like a thought than a sound, weaving stories that ran together like streams, joining a river tales of other sleepers who had found the garden, of the seasons turning in their endless wheel, of the oak's deep roots reaching down into earth that remembered the beginning of all things, of its branches reaching up toward stars that would burn long after the last human voice fell silent. The words required no attention, no effort to follow or understand. They simply were, existing in the space between waking and sleeping, and Eleanor let them wash over her and through her, let them carry away the sharp edges of her thoughts, the tight knots of her worries, the accumulated weight of days and weeks and months of trying too hard, caring too much, holding too tightly to things that could not and should not be held. Meredith began to hum a melody with no beginning and no end, circular as the seasons, simple as breathing. The sound twined with Thomas's voice, and with the whisper of the oak's leaves, and with the soft settling sounds of the garden, finding its own rest, and together they created something that was more than music, something that was the audible form of peace itself. Eleanor felt herself sinking, not falling, but being gently lowered, eased down through layers of consciousness, like a leaf spiraling slowly to earth on a still autumn day. Her body grew heavy and light simultaneously, rooted to the ground and floating free, held safe in that paradox, in that mystery, in that impossible truth that rest requires surrender, and surrender requires trust, and trust requires nothing at all except the willingness to let go. And so she let go. She released her grip on control, on vigilance, on the exhausting need to manage and monitor and make things happen through force of will. She gave herself to the oak, and the oak accepted her offering with the untroubled grace of something that had been receiving such gifts since before humans learned to name the stars. In the morning, or perhaps it was still evening, or perhaps time had ceased to have meaning in any conventional sense, Eleanor would wake to find herself beneath the oak, refreshed and whole, with the taste of apples sweet in her mouth, and the memory of the garden's peace lodged deep in her heart like a seed that would grow and flower in its own time. She would find her way back through the wooden gate and along the lane to the village, and she would carry with her the understanding that the garden was always there, always waiting, always willing to receive her whenever she needed sanctuary from the noise and rush and relentless demands of the waking world. But that was future, and this was now, and now Eleanor was sleeping, truly sleeping, held in the oak's embrace while Thomas and Meredith kept their quiet vigil, while the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, while the earth turned on its axis, and the garden breathed, and the night deepened, and the peace that passes understanding settled over everything like dew. The whispers beneath the old oak continued, patient and eternal, and they would continue long after Eleanor returned to her life, would continue through all the autumns to come, offering rest to the weary and peace, to the troubled and the gentle, abiding presence of something that asks nothing but gives everything, as freely and fully as the earth gives life, as the sky gives light, as love gives itself away again and again, without diminishment, without end, without condition. And in that giving and that receiving, in that eternal exchange, the garden endured, and the oak stood, and the story continued as it always had and always would, forever and ever, world without end. And so, my friend, the story of Whispers Beneath the Oak comes gently to a close. Here in the Violet Library, the book slowly closes, its glow softening as it returns to the shelf. The golden lamplight around you grows warmer, wrapping you like a blanket. You are safe. You are cared for. Take another slow, easy breath in and out. Let your shoulders sink deeper, your body heavier. Feel the quiet of this moment surrounding you like the hush of a starry night. Remember, you can always return here. The Violet Library will be waiting, its shelves filled with stories, its lantern lit just for you. Whenever you need rest, whenever you long for peace, these doors will open. For now, let go of the day. Drift into the calm, into stillness, into sleep. The sea is steady, the sky is endless, and you are held between them in peace. Good night, my friend, until we meet again.